And now live from the Alaska Native Heritage Center, Decision 2010, the Senatorial Debate, with your moderator, Steve McDonald.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight for our debate, Decision 2010, Leaders of the Last Frontier. This is the second part of our program involving the candidates for the United States Senate. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Thank you.
Joining us around the table are Democratic candidate Scott McAdams, Republican Joe Miller, and incumbent Lisa Murkowski, who is running a write-in campaign. Welcome again to all of you. The format's pretty straightforward. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'll give you 60 seconds to answer. If after everybody's had a crack at the question, you want to extend the conversation, feel free. I'll try and step back and just let you have that conversation. I want to start off by asking a question directly to each one of you, and I'll start with you first, Mr. McAdams. You are the current mayor of Sitka, and during this campaign you've talked about the experience you've gained as mayor and how it would help you if you're elected to the United States Senate. I don't mean to belittle the job in any stretch here, but it is a part-time position. There is an executive manager or city manager that oversees the day-to-day functions of government in Sitka and oversees the budget. Can you just tell us what practical experience have you gained, and how does that equate to a big jump like the U.S. Senate?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I believe that the last 8 years as a locally elected leader in my community may have been the best experience that I could have gained for both this campaign and for this job. The mayor of any community in Alaska is the chief spokesperson, they're the chief advocate. They're the person who goes out, moves forward the needs of the community to both a state and national audience. So, and I'd also say that as a locally elected community leader, having had to account for matters of policy and budget, for positions that I've taken, in the frozen food aisle of the grocery store, standing in front of City Hall or anywhere else in the community, positioned me well to understand what it means to be an appropriator at a higher level. I think that Alaska's 300 small towns, even Anchorage, and speaking the language of community, understanding what the needs are of a young state, of an infrastructure-poor state, positions me well when I sit on the other side of the senatorial table.
Okay, Mr. McAdams, thanks very much. Mr. Miller, I want to go over to you. For weeks, the Alaska media have been asking you about your job performance when you were an attorney for the Fairbanks North Star Borough, particularly about reports that said that you had used government computers to conduct partisan political business. You refused to answer those questions. You held a news conference to tell reporters that you weren't going to answer any more questions about your past. Earlier this week, on Monday, you went to CNN and you confirmed that indeed you had been disciplined for using borough computers for political purposes. My question is, why not answer those questions when the Alaska reporters were asking them? Why go on national media at this particular point in time?
Well, I think one of the values that I bring to the table is that I'm not a professional politician. And in fact, the group that I have working with me is absolutely made up of primarily volunteers. In fact, many of the people that are actually sitting in this room have never been involved in a political campaign before. A lot of our staff the same way. We haven't hired teams to come in and do the things that campaigns do. Rather, this is somebody that entered into the political fray with, not a real understanding about how all these things work, but recognizing that our country's at a point that things need to get changed. I think, even though the primary election was about issues, and we won that race, the general has become about personal issues. And frankly, I think that the naivete is one of the things that kept us from answering the questions initially. It is true. During a lunch hour, I did get on borough computers, and I participated in a private poll for about 5 minutes. It was a mistake I made. I was suspended for 3 days or received a dock of 3 days' pay, and I've learned from that. And that's one of the things about me is that I'm not a perfect person. And in fact, I think Alaskans know more about me now today than probably any other candidate. I don't think we've seen anybody else's personnel files. Certainly, I don't think you know about the past history of many of these candidates as you do me. And I think that's a good thing because Alaskans get to understand that, hey, they're electing somebody like them. I've gone through trials. I've not always had a silver spoon. I've had challenges in life. And that gives them an empathy for where I'm at. And I think that's a value that I bring to the table.
Okay.
And it's certainly one with flaws. There's no question.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Appreciate it. For Senator Murkowski, when our producer, Jennifer Castro, went out on the streets to ask Alaskans if they had any questions for our candidates, she was very surprised. She found about a dozen people who asked the question. They wanted to know why you thought it was okay, why you think it's okay to run in this race as a write-in candidate, since voters decided not to elect you back in August, and you had conceded to Mr. Miller. And that was their question as to why continue.
Clearly a very difficult decision on my part, one that I weighed heavily. But I listened to what Alaskans were saying, and I listened very clearly. And I thought about the statement that I made in Kenai, a statement that was made before a very difficult and a very contentious and a very negative campaign by the Tea Party Express, the outside group, in that last 4 or 5 days of that campaign. And I decided that it would be better to go back on that statement that was made rather than disenfranchise Alaskans who were clearly saying that you have a candidate with Mr. McAdams who got 3.5% of that vote, who just clearly does not have that experience. And Scott, 23 months as a part-time mayor doesn't get you to the United States Senate. And Joe, your statement here this evening demonstrates, I think, again, the lack of fitness for the office. And so I decided the campaign in the primary was done, and I was moving forward with a new campaign. And I think what we saw this past week, what we saw just today, with the editorials in the Anchorage Daily News, in the Juneau Empire, where Alaskans are saying, you know what, this is something that we support, and thank you for giving us a choice.
Thank you, Senator. Next question is for all three of you to answer. And again, if you want to continue the conversation after all three of you had a shot at the question, at the answer, please feel free to jump in. Mr. Miller, I'll start with you. Federal spending is a major topic in this campaign, as well as campaigns across the country. Many Americans are angry over what they see as a government that's out of control. In Alaska, however, there are many economists and business people who see federal money as the third leg of a three-legged stool, economic stool. How do you cut back on federal spending? What gets cut? And how do you balance Alaska's needs at the same time, or do you? I'll give you 60 seconds.
All right. Well, whether or not you re-elect Senator Murkowski, or if we have Senator McAdams in office, or if you elect me, federal funds to the state will absolutely shrink. There's no question about it. We're at a point right now that our debt load is unsustainable. In other words, it's so big that even those that are out there paying for our debt can't continue at the same level. We've already seen now 2 Western countries that have fallen in their economic sense. You got Greece, you most recently have Great Britain. So those dollars are shrinking. And what do you do when you've got a state that is 40% dependent on federal funds? You certainly don't sell them a bill of goods that say, hey, we're going to continue to spend at the same rate, and you re-elect me and give me my seniority, I will continue to bring home the bacon. That's simply not true. It won't happen. It can't happen. And so what we have to do as Alaskans is we've got to fight as hard as other leaders in the state have fought, but fight in a different direction rather than for the earmarks, for the resource base that we have. And if we put as much effort behind that effort for resources as we did earmarks, this state can create the economy that we need to make sure that we have jobs.
Okay, Mr. Miller, thank you. Senator Murkowski, same question to you, 60 seconds.
If we're really going to cut the spending, if we're really going to deal with the deficit, it has to be with entitlements. That's where you can make the real reductions, and it is hard. And it is difficult, but it needs to be done. Now, there's a lot of talk about cutting back on earmarks, but you want to talk about a red herring. If you suggest that by eliminating earmarks, all of a sudden you are reducing the deficit, that is incorrect, and either you don't know what you're talking about or you've been fed a line. The fact of the matter is if we eliminate earmarks, what that means is that federal spending still continues. We're not going to be saving a dime of it. What it means is that those that are in the agencies, those unelected bureaucrats, will be setting the priorities. The priorities that they have in Washington, D.C. are most often not in alignment with what happens here in the state of Alaska. President Obama has been here once. He doesn't know what the priorities are. As your elected official, that's what we do.
Okay. Senator, thank you. Scott McAdams.
Well, there's no question that we are a young state. We are an infrastructure poor state. And when you look throughout Alaska, it's the baseline of any economy is reliable transportation, affordable energy, functioning public works infrastructure, and educated populace. So many of our communities in this state don't have the basic foundation of an economy. Now, Joe has made a pledge and signed a vow not to request any appropriation that is not part of the president's regular introduced budget or that's made by a local, and I emphasize local, or special interest. I believe that's dangerous to our economy. Senator Murkowski, on the other hand, has voted against 11 straight appropriations bills in committee this year, voted over $40 in Alaskan projects. I also believe that that's dangerous because when the senator votes no, it's much like Joe.
Tell me, I'll give you 30 seconds to answer this part of the question, just a little follow-up. What would you cut? If you have to cut something out of the federal budget, what do you cut?
Well, taking a look at, there are, first of all, entitlements, I don't think Social Security is an entitlement. I think it's a promise. I think when Senator Murkowski voted to privatize Social Security in 2008, that wasn't cutting an entitlement, that was breaking a promise to Alaska seniors. There are some things in federal spending. I think a 3% cut in discretionary spending across the board is something that we could certainly look at. But you don't balance a federal budget on the backs of kids, on the backs of rural communities, on the backs of seniors, while we continue to give tax cuts to the richest 1% of American multimillionaires and provide tax loopholes to multinational corporations.
Okay. Senator, what do you cut?
Well, you do have to start with the entitlements. And Scott says, well, you know, with Social Security, we have to look at some of the options that are out there. Scott has suggested that what we need to do is we need to basically increase the taxes. I disagree with that. I think that there are other solutions that we could look to when we're talking about reforming Social Security. But when it comes to entitlements, you know, look at what was just passed by the Democratic-led Congress and signed into law by the president. It was a $2.5 trillion health care plan that is not sustainable, and that is loaded on top of an already broken Medicare program. We did not fix Medicare. So we need to look at the entitlement programs critically. And Social Security must be looked at as well. And Scott, you mentioned the privatization. And
yeah, I'm sorry. Go wrap it up really quick, please.
I want to have an opportunity to make a clarifying point on that vote, because what we looked at in 2007 was a pilot program that would allow those who wanted to opt in, but a very limited percentage of their earnings could be put into a private status. So it's not as if we voted to privatize Social Security.
Thanks, Senator. Mr. Miller.
Specifically, the International Monetary Fund needs to be cut significantly. We had almost $10 billion American dollars going to Greece to sustain their irresponsible spending. In addition to that, if you look at the United Nations, we spend much greater percentage based on population on that body than what other nations do. Not advocating a pullout, but certainly a reduction of funds. If you look at the OMB study, over 200 duplicative programs have been identified that I believe also ought to be cut. Senator Coburn, I believe, has also identified several hundred more programs that also could be put under the gun. And I think we've got to start at those areas. I'm surprised at the senator with the statements about Social Security when she accuses me, because I've talked about reform of Social Security, of actually wanting to cut it. And my dad and mom are actually Social Security dependents. They receive primarily their income from Social Security. I'm glad that she's now joining the roundtable and suggesting that that's an area of reform too, although I would suggest not those currently receiving or those getting ready to receive, but people later on down the line, like my time frame. Obviously, we have to look at a new direction because it is such a big chunk of the budget.
Candidates, thanks. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back. If you want to pick up the conversation when we come back, we'll do that, okay? We're going to have more when we come back from this break.
Decision 2010. The senatorial debate continues. Here's your moderator, Steve McDonald.
Welcome back to the Alaska Native Heritage Center, where we're talking to the candidates for U.S. Senate. We went to break. We were talking about where you would specifically cut the budget. I'm not going to help. And Mr. McAdams, we're going to start off again with you to continue that conversation. We were looking for specifics. Where does the federal budget get cut?
Well, we were speaking specifically about what Senator Murkowski framed as entitlements. Meaning to be Social Security, Medicare, other promises that we've made to America's seniors. In our last debate, Senator, you spoke to the merits of raising the age for eligibility in Social Security. Here's something that I have never heard the Senator or Mitch McConnell or anyone else speak to from that side of the aisle. And this is just a simple fix. Senator Murkowski refers to it as a tax increase. I believe it's, as a matter of equity, the right thing to do, and it comes down to values. Today in the Social Security program, there is an artificial collar or a cap at the $106,000 mark for wage earners. And what that means is that a worker on the North Slope who makes $106,000 a year pays the same payroll tax as the CEO of a bank who makes $10 million a year on Wall Street. Now, if that artificial cap, if that artificial collar were removed, Social Security is solvent for the next 75 years. But you know, for far too long, the United States Senate has been a millionaires club doing the bidding of billionaires. It's time we send a regular Alaskan to the United States Senate to represent everyday Alaskans.
Anybody else want to pick on that? Senator Murkowski, you want to answer that?
Well, one of the things that I think we need to talk about when we're reducing government spending and kind of moving off the entitlement issue. And this is the issue of just the waste that goes on. And part of what happens is within the process, you've got a system where every year we're just working on the budget. We don't really have the opportunity to do the oversight of the programs that we put in place. We've got a level of regulation that not only costs the government, but it costs each and every one of us in the society. What are we doing to ensure that we are being conscientious and responsible within the government programs that we have put in place? I have been a proponent of a biennial budget. I supported it when I was in the State House, and I think it's an idea that would work at the federal level as well, allowing us the opportunity to really scrutinize what we have instituted within our own government and these programs that are no longer serving their purpose, whether they may be farm subsidies or whether they are just inefficiencies within the system.
Senator, thank you. And Mr. Miller, I'm going to give you the last word on this subject.
With all due respect, Senator, when you were appointed by your dad to office, the debt was $6 trillion. You now have a debt of $13.5 trillion and climbing. You voted for appropriation after appropriation that expanded the debt load, not on this generation, but on future generations. And you deserve to take some responsibility for that. But I would suggest that what the state needs to do is it needs to start focusing not on those earmarks, that less than 1%, but we need to focus on trading earmarks perhaps for ANWR. Not cap and trade for ANWR, but earmarks for ANWR.
You want to? We'll move on now to another subject here. We did go out onto the streets of Anchorage. We asked some people about what kind of questions that they would have for our candidates, and here's one of them now, if we can hear it.
Well, I'd like to know if they would support repealing the Obama health care legislation.
Senator Murkowski, give you first crack. I assume that you heard the question okay over the loudspeaker here.
I would not only support repeal, I have supported repeal of the Obama health care plan. Period.
Okay. Mr. Miller, where do you stand on that?
I absolutely support repeal. That's been our position from the beginning. But I would also note that we have an unfriendly administration right now. The President Obama is clearly going to veto any repeal effort. And so I think we have to be very active in our role to reverse the growth of government. And so I believe that we ought to defund it if we can't get the votes, the 2/3 to repeal it.
Okay. John McAdams, Obama health care, what do you do with it?
I don't support repeal of health care reform. And, you know, the process that led up to the passage of this bill really is a profile in what's dysfunctional about Washington, D.C. With 150 Republican amendments, this bill could have just as well been called Mitch McConnell care as it's been called Obamacare. But there are elements of the bill certainly that raise concern. Somebody attached an onerous requirement on small businesses requiring a 1099 form to be provided from business to business for anyone who does more than $600 in transactions per year. Of course, that needs to be removed from the bill. But one of the things I see as being a problem with healthcare in this country is right now, today in America, health insurance companies have a bigger role in decision making than doctors and patients do. Independent operators, the self-employed, commercial fishermen, can't afford access to health care because premiums are too high. I mean, we need to make our healthcare system user-friendly for our people and make sure that Americans have the health coverage that they need.
Okay, Mr. McAdams, thank you very much. Here's another question from one of our viewers who emailed our website, ktuu.com. She writes, the don't ask, don't tell policy has been a spotlight issue over the past few months. What is your position on the don't ask, don't tell policy? I'll start with you, Mr. Miller.
I'm the only veteran that's running for the U.S. Senate this election cycle in Alaska. I'm a combat vet. I think it's wrong to play political games with our servicemen and women in uniform. What happened just most recently, this was a vote that Senator Murkowski missed. She ducked the issue, was that they tried to play political games with the military that's out there trying to protect all of us. It is the military that ought to make the decisions for the policy within the military. It's not the role of government to come into the military and socially engineer it. It puts our readiness at risk. The focus point of our military has got to be defending our national interest. And so any time that we play games with it, it ends up creating a bad result.
Senator Murkowski? Go ahead, Senator.
This is an initiative where we asked our men and women who are serving us, we asked them to weigh in on this. We owe them the decency and the courtesy to bring those responses back in, to assess them, to make a determination as to whether or not it will impact the readiness, whether it will impact the level of preparedness for the fight, and deal with it accordingly. But to ask of them and then for Congress to preempt that before we have gotten anything back from them is wrong. And we're seeing this play out. Even those within the Obama administration who believe that we may need to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, acknowledge that we owe it to the men and women that we have asked for their opinion, that we wait for those results to be calculated.
Senator, thank you. Scott McAdams, same question to you.
I support the full repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I believe that as our society, as our country has evolved, every single time there has been a demographic that has been allowed to fully integrate in the United States military, it's been done with great success. I believe that it will also be the case when Don't Ask, Don't Tell is fully repealed.
Okay. I'm going to stay with you on this one, Mr. McAdams. Thousands of military men and women based here in Alaska have done tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are many who have lost their lives in the fighting. And actually, I'm going to start with you, Senator Murkowski, please, if you don't mind. I just got mixed up in my order here. There are many who have lost their lives in the fighting. The United States is winding down military operations in Iraq, but there doesn't seem to be much of an exit strategy for Afghanistan. What do you feel is the best way to bring peace to that country, establish a stable government, and bring our troops home? Senator,
Well,
start with you.
We have asked General Petraeus to take command, to lead the United States role in Afghanistan. It is not the role of Congress to micromanage where General Petraeus takes the effort in Afghanistan. And those who support our men and women in uniform need to also support that mission. I have not been one of those who has suggested that we need to place an arbitrary timeline for withdrawal, an arbitrary timeline which again sends signals to those who would not only do us harm there, but who would look to do harm in our country. I think we recognize that the threat, the fight in Afghanistan is incredibly important to our security here to keep us safe from the threat of terrorism as well.
Senator, thanks. Joe Miller, to you.
The reason that we're in this situation is because of something that I call feel-good foreign policy. That happens because we don't have a lot of people in Congress that have veteran experience, combat experience, and they think that it's a proper role of the military to go out and impose democracies throughout the world. It's kind of a neoconservative approach, which I disagree with. In fact, most of the men and women that served with me would disagree with that as well. They joined the service to defend national interests. That means you see terrorism. That does obviously pose a huge threat to our country. You go in with a laser focus, you take it out. But obviously, where you've already got troops on the ground and committed, you got to follow through with the leadership, the military leadership on the ground. You got to make sure that the commitments stand so they aren't left with an empty bag, basically, to defend themselves. And the rules of engagement, they can't be politicized. They've got to be according to the Geneva Conventions, clearly. But you can't go in there and talk about the democracy movement and not look at the soldiers that are there sacrificing their lives and saying, look, we're going to allow you to defend yourselves. We aren't going to allow you to be killed first and then shoot later. It has to be a situation where we defend our soldiers.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Scott McAdams, what to do about Afghanistan?
You know, certainly, I believe that we need to give General Petraeus some time to help the United States refocus our mission. I do believe that al-Qaeda remains a threat to the Western world, and it needs to be pursued. But here's what my pledge is to Alaskans. Before I ever take any vote to appropriate to send an American soldier in harm's way, I will be dogged with the administration to make sure that we have got a clear purpose, that we have got an achievable mission, that we have a crystal clear definition of what success looks like. Because we can neither afford in human blood or in national treasury to be engaged in endless war.
Mr. McAdams, thank you. I'm going to stay with you for this next question. Shift gears a little bit here, folks. Earlier in the year, the Arizona legislature approved and its governor signed a strict law aimed at stopping illegal immigration in the state. Arizona lawmakers say they took the step out of frustration over Washington's failure to do something about the problem. What are your views on illegal immigration, and how should we be protecting our borders? Mr. McAdams, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I oppose any legislation that promotes racial profiling. I believe in a civil society we have no room to pull someone over, ask for their papers based on the color of their skin. But as it relates to the issue of illegal immigration, I do believe we need to enforce the laws we have on our books. We do need to secure our borders. We're caught in the middle of our neighbors and friends, Americans who live in border towns in the southwestern part of the United States are caught in the middle of a drug war. And so there's no question we do need to make sure we secure our borders. But you know, here's what I see. I think that Lisa and Mitch McConnell are big on talk, but short on action for this problem. I mean, we have a supply and demand issue with businesses that hire illegal aliens while we continue to look the other way. We need to get serious about cracking down on what draws undocumented workers into this country. And so that's what I plan to do once I'm elected to this office.
Mr. McAdams, thank you. Senator Murkowski, your turn on this question.
It should not be up to the state of Arizona to figure out how they secure that border. That is a responsibility of the federal government. Now, what we need to do, we need to make sure that we have not only adequate border patrol and security. We need to make sure that we have the resources that are available there. We need to end the practice of catch and release because we don't have the detainment facilities. I agree with Scott. We do need to look to how we ensure that those employers who are hiring illegal aliens, that there are penalties associated with that, and substantial penalties, so that is not an attraction for those that would be coming across. We need to make sure that we enforce the laws that are currently on the books. But what we should not be doing is we should not be looking to East Germany as a model for our security and border enforcement.
Mr. Miller, your turn first.
Last time I checked, East Germany was no longer a nation, but notwithstanding the fact, I will tell you, Senator, that I'm absolutely shocked that you would sit back and talk about how we need to secure our border when you voted repeatedly against funding defense. Repeatedly. Not once, but in 2006, 2007, and 2009. The fact of the matter is we have legislation that's passed to build a fence. It needs to be built, and that's the first step. But the second thing is, Senator, I completely disagree with this concept that you can take care of amnesty or you can take care of illegal aliens while at the same time voting for amnesty. And that is specifically what you did in 2006. If you create an attraction for people to come across, obviously they're going to come across. The federal government does have the responsibility to establish a secure border. There's no question about it. But when we do these other things that are counter to that, we're just making talk. We aren't actually doing the thing that needs to be done to take care of that problem. And so obviously a state that's left kind of in the lurch like that clearly has got to be able to do what it needs to do. So I support what Arizona is doing. I think all states have the right to protect, obviously, their integrity. I mean, for crying out loud, there are 3 counties right now in Arizona overrun. And yet we sit back and we say Arizona can't do what it's doing. We have an administration that's suing the state of Arizona. So first step is to fulfill your responsibilities as a senator and to vote for a fence and to make sure that you are not rewarding illegal acts by providing amnesty.
Mr. Miller, thanks very much. Go ahead, Mr. McAdams, do you want to answer?
Joe, you're right. East Germany is no longer a country because there was once an American president who proclaimed to the world, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, once I win this race and am sent to the United States Senate, I'll make sure that Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, Joe Miller, and Jim DeMint don't build the wall on the Mexican border.
You want to take one more crack at this and you can close it out?
You know, to suggest that in this day and age, that the way to keep people from illegally entering our country is to build a wall. What we need to do is we need to, as a nation, make sure that we enforce the laws that we have. We can build a wall as high as we want, but if we are still the land of opportunity, a land of opportunity that looks the other way when it comes to enforcement of our own laws, then we can't build a fence that is high enough. We need to be using our smarts, and our smarts is just not putting a concrete wall up.
Thanks, candidates. We'll take a break, and we'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us. We're back here at the Alaska Native Heritage Museum, and we want to thank the fine folks out here for making this beautiful facility available to us tonight. Thanks. The U.S. Small Business Administration has a program called 8A. I know you're all very familiar with that. It basically allows Alaska Natives, American Indian, and Hawaiian Native groups to receive no-bid contracts for federal projects. It's brought in hundreds of millions of dollars for Alaska Native corporations, but it's also brought out critics who claim the program drives up costs on federal projects and could be vulnerable to fraud. How do you feel about the 8A program, Mr. McAdams? Start with you. 60 seconds, sir.
Sure. Well, first of all, I believe Alaska's Native corporations and the Small Business Administration 8A program have built great capacity in Alaska. I mean, there's no question that when you take a look at the progress, the business acumen, the industry that's come to this state, the capacity that's been built in Alaska over the last several years, it's placed Alaska Native people in a position to be leaders in commerce and industry throughout the rest of this century. Having said that, and while I will continue to support the 8A program, I'm all for accountability. I'm all for transparency. And also, I believe that the way we really build rural Alaska, our villages, is by redoubling, maybe even tripling our efforts in addressing and helping Alaska's 229 federally recognized tribes. You know, a corporation's mandate is to provide a profit to its shareholders, and I believe that our corporations will continue to be successful at that. A tribe's mandate is to provide services to its citizens, including health, education, social services, and community development.
Mr. McAdams, thanks very much. Mr. Miller, same question to you, please.
Reform is coming to 8A contracts whether or not you elect Scott, Lisa, or myself to the U.S. Senate. There's a bill introduced already to reform, and the fact is there are no-bid contracts. They don't lead to efficient services, but I think my biggest concern that I have right now with the 8A contract system is that the benefits that are delivered are not as significant as they should be to the shareholder. Granted, over the the course of the 8A contract, something like $600 in distributions have been provided to shareholders. But frankly, when you look at the villages in rural Alaska, for example, in fact, over the course of the Murkowski dynasty, almost 3 decades, the village today is not a heck of a lot different than the village was then. Same way with 8A contracts. There should be advancing opportunity and advancing benefits provided to those that are actually the shareholders of those corporations. So I think any reform has got to look at opportunity for shareholder employment more than what we have today. I mean, that's got to be a benchmark to make sure that those benefits flow to the shareholders.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Senator?
I do support the 8A program. I think we have seen the benefits here in this state, not only in terms of dollars that are returned, the jobs and the opportunities that are returned here to the state, the scholarships that help build that Native leadership. These are all good and these are positives. Now, I have said that I support the 8A program, but it's not without, it's not complete. There are qualifications. We have to make sure that a good product is delivered to the government and that it is as promised. Now, Joe has just said that these 8A contracts don't lead to efficient services. I think that you would absolutely find disagreement with that, not only from within the 8As, but from those government contractors themselves that specifically go to the Native 8A programs because of the efficiency in the services, because of the quality of work that is performed. Their reputation continues to build, and this is the reason that we're seeing the positive benefits coming out.
Thank you, Senator. You go ahead.
And we're talking about the same federal contractors that, of course, pumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into Senator Murkowski's campaign to perpetuate their 8A contracts, which we believe is, of course, a violation of the law. But I would say that of more concern to me than anything else is that when you look at how business is done, when the 8A contracts are awarded to the regional corporations and they bring in subsidiaries to let the work, most of the time, or many times, those subsidiaries are not owned by Native Alaskans. They have no connections to Native Alaskans, and significant profit goes to those subsidiaries. And then the profit that remains with the regional corporations doesn't flow through to the shareholders in a way that they're benefited. Again, the question is asked, is the village today better than it was 30 years ago? And if not, why? What changes do we need to make sure that we get better benefits in rural Alaska?
Mr. McAdams?
Steve, as it relates to this issue of corporate investment in campaigns, there's no question that the corporate role and the corporate influence in American campaigning has gone awry. It's out of control. Now, Joe, I think it maybe is a little bit disingenuous for you to attack Senator Murkowski for receiving corporate donations through Alaska Native corporations when the Koch brothers underwrote your primary campaign that defeated Senator Murkowski. Now, having said that, I'm proud to say I used to think campaign finance reform was one of 20 important issues. I now believe it is the issue. And when I win this race, I will not receive, over the next 6 years, I will not tolerate even $1 coming to me from a corporate political action committee. That's a promise I'm making to Alaska's voters right now.
I'll tell you what, we'll go with Senator Murkowski and then Joe Miller. Senator, go ahead, your turn.
Well, I do think that this is an important subject because the criticism that you have leveled at me, Joe, somehow or other that the ANCs should not be able to donate to me. You are the one that has been holding out at all turns. We need to stand by our Constitution. Well, you start with the first one here, and it was the Citizens United case that came down and said that corporations would have that same ability. Now, Scott mentions the Koch brothers, and in fact, they have been able to take advantage of those laws in that court ruling as well. But if you're going to stand behind the Constitution and you're saying that somehow or other Native corporations should not be entitled to these same benefits, that's a little bit inconsistent there.
Citizens United did not resolve the issue as to whether or not federal contractors can donate to a campaign so that they can get fatter federal contracts. And the fact of it is that's corrupt, and it shouldn't be going on. But the second point that I think needs to be understood in this whole debate is that when you're talking about somebody that has something in the game to get out, we're talking about quid pro quo, and you compare that to people in the Tea Party that are out there because they're concerned about this nation. They aren't investing because they want some fat government contract in response. They aren't investing investing because they've got some sort of personal sweat in the game other than the fact that they want this country turned around. And that's the difference. That's one of the reasons why there are so many people that are behind the reform movement in the United States today. The country is going down in the wrong direction. And unless we switch it around with people that have not been involved in politics before, I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. Boy, I am up against a break. I'll give you 10 seconds. Can you do it?
I got to get in too.
Okay, 10. Okay.
10 seconds.
Do I hear?
I absolutely disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling on Citizens United, but it's important for voters to remember that Senator Murkowski voted for Alito and Roberts and voted against Sotomayor and Kagan. I mean, this corporate influence in politics is corrupting our system.
Joe has suggested that somehow or other there's a quid pro quo going on here. And I would suggest that you look at my record for rural Alaska and Alaska Natives for the past 7 years to see what I have done for them, for Alaska, on their behalf and their benefit. This is not about 8As. The AFN endorsement, overwhelming of me, was because of what I have done for those First Peoples here in the state of Alaska, and I will continue to do for as long as I am able.
Okay, guys, I'm really up against it. I'm going to have to take a break. We'll be back right after this with more. Thank you. I'm sorry, guys. Welcome back to the Alaska Native Heritage Museum. We've come to a point in the program where we're going to let the candidates ask one another some questions. We're going to start with you, Mr. McAdams, and you have a question for Mr. Miller, and we'll give you 45 seconds to answer the question.
Actually, my question's for Senator Murkowski.
Okay, well, you get a chance to do that too, but if you've got, you're going to ask them both.
Oh, okay.
So right now, we're going to go with Mr. Miller. Yeah,
no. That's the way it is.
That's why we got to do this. That's right. So, for Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you have, as I mentioned before, there's a group out there called the Coalition of Citizens Against Government Waste. This is the group that often worked to shame Senator Stevens for the appropriations he secured for Alaska. You've signed their pledge. You've signed the pledge and made a vow to not vote for any appropriation or request any appropriation that's not part of the President's regularly introduced budget. You've also made a pledge and signed a vow to not request any appropriation or vote for any appropriation made by a local or special interest. Now, having been a guy who's gone to Washington, D.C. 12 times over the last 8 years, asking for better schools, better school policy, better roads, ports, harbors, hydroelectric infrastructure, how are we going to build the baseline of Alaska's economy with you saying no to investment to Alaska?
Well, I think the first thing is to be honest, and that is that we are no longer going to have earmarks whether or not I get elected. The point of it is that the Republican House leadership is opposed to it. It's going to be a Republican majority come November 2nd. The fact of the matter is, even in this state, we've seen less and less in the way of earmarks. This year, the last time I checked, it was less than 1% of the budget. And yet earmarks are the single most corrupting influence in Congress. We sit back and we ask ourselves, why in the world are we passing out these multi-trillion-dollar packages, appropriations? And it's because the votes are basically bought by the earmarks. Okay. So we've got to change things.
Mr. Miller, you get a chance to ask a question of Senator Murkowski now.
I was going to ask you a different question, but I just couldn't pass up the fitness for office question. You have posed a question concerning my use of computers, and you've suggested that that makes me unfit for office. I would ask you a number of things about your past. We haven't made those issues in this campaign, primarily because we think the issue before the Alaskan voter are the facts that we're sitting right now on a federal budget deficit that is going to kill this state if we don't take corrective action soon. But you were involved in a number of things, such as the penny land deal, where you absolutely received at a very much sub-market price a piece of property. You didn't disclose it on your federal disclosure. You were involved yourself with computer use in 2004, where you sent out thousands of emails on a school district computer system, illegal, and yet you use the same standard for me. I'm a combat vet, a U.S. magistrate judge, was an acting district court judge, was also a state magistrate, have been throughout the state, have gone through a number of things throughout my life that I think allow Alaskans to know more about where I'm at, and in fact are familiar with me in ways that many other candidates aren't. Would you be willing to subject yourself to the same level of scrutiny that your campaign has subjected to me?
In fact,
45 seconds.
In fact, Joe, I, along with Scott, complied with the rules. When we filed for office, we filed a financial disclosure that laid out Everything that I have in terms of my assets, my liabilities, my credit card debt, where my children's education IRA is invested, because that's what is required. That is what is required as a federal candidate. And yet you somehow thought that the rules were meant for somebody else because you didn't do it for 5 months. And then when it finally caught up with you, it took you another few weeks to do it. You want to talk about disclosure? Why don't you start with the first thing that was required when you filed for office?
Senator, thank you. We're going to have to wrap that one up now, but I got it. Hang on. I'm going to have Senator Murkowski, I'm going to have you ask a question to Scott McAdams right now.
All right. Scott, is it really true? Is it really true that you've only been a registered voter in the state for the past 10 years? I understand that you lived here in the 1990s, but why did you wait until the age of 30 to exercise your constitutional right and duty to vote?
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I, throughout the course of my 20s, worked on deck as a commercial fisherman. Went back to college in the 90s, worked on my degree, was raising a young family. And I have to tell you, in my 20s, learned about community, got active in my community, realized the importance of community, and caught the bug. I showed up to a meeting, had something to say, and somebody said, Scott, you should get involved on the board. Showed up to meetings, and people said, Scott, you should go out and coach our kids. I certainly have been somebody who has been engaged in community for a long, long time. My voter registration record coming back, registering at age 30, running for office at age 31. I spent my entire 30s in service to my community.
Thank you, Mr. McAdams. Now you have a question for Senator Murkowski.
I do. Senator, this last week, your campaign sent a mailer out to 25,000 Alaskan voters, mischaracterizing Democratic support for your campaign, saying that Ethan Berkowitz was going to vote for you. Ethan has come out very clearly. He's voting for me. He stated that Senator Patty Murray was supporting your campaign. Patty Murray has come out very clearly that she's supporting me. Senator, throughout the course of this campaign and throughout the course of your tenure in the United States Senate, you've talked about me being a part-time mayor. I think in some ways the case could be made that you've been a part-time senator. And the reason why I say that is because you voted with Mitch McConnell and your party 90% of the time over the last year. You voted against 89 projects for Alaska. You voted against 11 appropriations bills with over $400 million attached.
Good question, please.
You voted against the hospital to Nome, but you took credit for it. You voted against expansion of the Port of Anchorage, but you took credit for it. You voted against hydroelectric capacity in Southeast Alaska, but you took credit for it. How can you take credit for projects that you vote no on?
Well, first of all, Scott, I thank you for reminding voters that I did put about $400 million worth of projects into these appropriations bills. It was critical, it was important, and those appropriations bills are still going through the process. We have gone through a markup process. Perhaps you're not aware of how that whole process works, but those bills have not yet gone to the floor. And we fought hard in committee to make sure that that top-line budget number was going to be ratcheted down. We haven't been able to work that accord yet. That is something that is still in process, and hopefully when we get back in November, we can resolve that. But thank you for noticing
Senator,
that
I
I
do
got
recognize that a no vote means no, and you voted no on all of those appropriations.
We're not done yet, Scott.
Okay, Senator, you have a question for Mr. Miller.
I do. Joe, you talk about your West Point career, your background there, and it really has been, I think, probably the cornerstone of your campaign. The primary was a time, though, when you actually came out and it was admitted that you had lied about my record, my vote on the Obama health care plan, You admitted to CNN, you didn't admit it to the Alaska reporters because you weren't talking to them, but you admitted to CNN that you were disciplined for using the Fairbanks North Star Borough computers to stack up the election within the Republican Party and then tried to cover it up. You just admitted that here in your first question to Steve McDonald. So my question to you is, what would your instructors, what would your classmates at West Point say about how well you have lived up to your code of honor?
Again, Senator, if your life was put under the same level of scrutiny as mine, you wouldn't even be sitting here today. And I will tell you another thing as well, that with respect to my West Point classmates, they're standing proudly behind me. I'm surprised that your hundreds of thousands of dollars dedicated to your investigators hasn't found somebody to stand up and say something against me from my West Point class. Maybe that's coming in the next week, too. But I have somebody named Randy DeSoto, class of 1989, who stands proudly with this campaign. I have people from West Point, military veterans, who stand proudly in this campaign. They know everything that everybody else knows about me, warts and all. The fact of the matter is, your campaign has worked aggressively to cheat from the Alaskan voters the opportunity to see the issues and the careening disaster that's coming upon us if we don't take a different direction. But you and Scott offer the ways of the past. I offer the ways of the future.
You have a question now from Mr. McAdams, please. And that'll be our final question, guys.
Scott, I want to give you kudos in this question, all right? Because, and this is genuine. You've done a lot for your community. There's no question about it. You've been an educator. You've been a member of the school board. It's my understanding you were also a president of the school board. It's obvious to me you've got a lovely family, wonderful children. It's obvious that you care about education. I was shocked when NEA and a number of teachers' unions endorsed Senator Murkowski. Why do you think that is?
I think that folks in this environment, Joe, to be perfectly frank, folks who recognize that the baseline of any economy is part of it is an educated populace, that the Department of Education is an important part of the overall picture in public education. I think that the NEA made a political decision based on a decision they made after the filing deadline. I think that what is the case is that teachers every day are coming into our camp. Teachers every day are joining hands with us. So I think that, to be perfectly frank, Joe, I think that there are a number of educators in this state who are concerned about your views of the world. Whether they may have endorsed Senator Murkowski, but they know that I'm working for every one of their votes.
Okay, we've got to leave that there. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with a final word right after this. Thank you, guys. And we want to give the candidates one last chance to sum up tonight's program. We're going to start with Joe Miller, and we'll give you about 30 seconds or so to make a final statement here, sir.
Well, I want to thank everyone for putting on this program. It's been an enjoyable evening to some extent. I think it's given Alaskans the opportunity to understand where we're coming from. And the main point that I want to leave with Alaskans is that I am one of you. Warts and all, you've got me. And you know exactly where I've been, and you know where I'm going. That's going to be direct. That's going to be direct when I get to the Senate. And it's designed to rescue the state from what's coming. We have got to do things to move us in the right direction, and we have the capacity to do it with the incredible resources we have here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Appreciate it. Mr. McAdams?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting this event. It's so great to be able to talk about the issues, even though we did talk about some of the dramas in this campaign as well. You know, we are a young state. We are an infrastructure poor state. We still need federal investment. We are a natural resource state. We need to bring our natural resources to market. We can't rely on another 6 years of not getting that job done. I believe Alaska needs a United States Senator who speaks the language of community, somebody who recognizes that what every single mayor, every single school board member, every single nonprofit board chairman understands, and that is the best government is community government. And I will bring that voice to Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. McAdams. And Lisa Murkowski, you get the last word here.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank you and Channel KTU for hosting this tonight. Appreciate the information. I think it's important that Alaskans look at this race. They need to know whether or not any of the three of us can take this state into the future. Scott is not ready to lead. Joe is not fit to lead. I have been leading this state. I have been leading this state for 8 years.
Go ahead.
And I will continue to do so, bringing the seniority that I have built, the work ethic that I have built, and the passion for a state that I love.
Okay.
I ask Alaskans for their support on November 2nd, most respectfully. Thank you. Fill it in,
Senator,
write it in.
thank you very much. And I think this discussion will go on long after the show's over. I just want to remind everybody, Alaskans, November 2nd is Election Day. Get out and vote. Take part in it now. It's up to you. Thank you for everybody for coming out. Thanks to the candidates. Thank you very much.